Now we're down to the last chapter and we're going to talk about the federal government. So we're just basically going to learn how they report out and how they make their own rules. So the federal accounting standards come from the FASAB, the Federal Accounting Standards Advisory Board. So remember, U.S. is a sovereign nation, so they can make up their own rules. They are required by our Constitution to make financial reports, but there's not a whole lot of details about how to do that in the Constitution. In fact, there's no details. But so they have this board that makes it up. The primary organizations that are in charge of financial reporting are the OMB, the Office of Management and Budget, and the Government Accountability Office, GAO, which they're like the government auditors. Accountability is like auditing. And the Department of the Treasury sort of coordinates all that. That's the department with an actual secretary level executive that is actually the reporting agency for the whole U.S. government. So Department of Treasury are the primary organizations. So together they started this Federal Accounting Standards Advisory Board, which comes up with the standards. So because it's a sovereign nation, the U.S. can just make up its own rules. So they try to get some good advice and come up with the good ideas and ways to report it out. So they have 2 executive branch advisors, 2 legislative branch advisors, and 6 others who are not federal government folks, so accountants and people like that, who get together and say this would be a good way to report out. So the FASAB comes up with rules like FASB, like GASB, like AICPA. They come up with rules like PCAOB comes up with auditor rules. So they come up with some rules and standards that give advice to the federal government. Let's say it says, this is our advice to you. Obviously, as a sovereign nation, the United States has nobody who can tell them any different. Punish them if they don't. All right. So these are the highest level of standards. So if you ever go to work for the federal government, which could be military, certainly there are plenty of agencies, plenty of Social Security offices, and plenty of places where there's accountants for at the federal level. You would follow FASAB standards, and there is a framework. And if you ever did that kind of accounting, you could go look up what the rule is for when the budget says this, and now you have to take that appropriation and put it on the book. So you can figure that all out from the standards. We're not going to worry too much about that, just understanding how it works. What does FASAB require to be reported out? A balance sheet, a statement of net cost, statement of changes in position, budgetary resources, custodial activity if applicable, and statement of social insurance if applicable. So what are these things? So a balance sheet, just like we've had balance sheets before, assets minus liabilities leaves what we would call an equity section in our normal accounting, and we've been having different things, right? Net position, net assets, and for the federal government, we call the difference between assets and liabilities net position. And just like for other governmental and nonprofit organizations, that equity section, the assets minus liabilities remainder, is divided into things like restricted, unrestricted, capital assets. We divide the governmental asset and liability remainder into unexpended appropriations and cumulative result of operations. So unexpended appropriations is, what's left at the end of the year, and cumulative result of operations would be, kind of like your retained earnings, but it's called cumulative result of operations. Statement of net cost displays the cost to the federal agency, and federal is doing accruals, so you don't have to worry about that modified accrual stuff. Changes in net position identifies the financing sources and used to support operations, and the statement matches the net position that you're going to get on the balance sheet. So it's kind of the equivalent of a retained earnings statement. You know, you calculate and you end up with your ending net position that you plug in the balance sheet. Statement of budgetary resources. And remember, each government agency is preparing this set of statements, right? So you can imagine the Social Security Department, the IRS, the FBI, the Army, the Navy, the Treasury Department. Every agency, they're all preparing this full set of statements, and then it gets consolidated up to the government level. So budgetary resources, so where the budget came from and how they're going to spend that, or how they did expend it. Custodial activities, so this is kind of an interesting one. Some organizations take in money and give it to other folks. It's like an agency fund. So if you think about it, the IRS takes in money from people pay their taxes, and the IRS takes the money, and then it distributes that money out to other branches of the government. Customs takes in money at the border for tariffs and things, and so they distribute that money out. So some of these agencies have custodial activities where they're taking in some money, but it really doesn't belong to that agency. It doesn't stay within the agency. It gets given back to the federal government and redistributed. So they have to do a custodial activity statement. And social insurance, some agencies provide social insurance programs like Social Security and Medicare, and they put out a statement to show the benefits they've paid. You know, how much income has come in and how much the benefits are projected to be. And it lets us examine, okay, are they able to make those payments or not? So each agency reports out, right, that full set of statements, if required. Not all of them are going to be like Social Security and need that kind of statement, but all of them report out. And then the federal government consolidates those into one big report. So kind of think like how all the universities report to the system level, then the system reports to the state of Texas, and then you'll see university column on the state of Texas financial statements, kind of like that. But of course the states don't report to the federal government, just the federal government agencies. So, you know, you'll see on the federal report, it'll be a combination of all the federal government operations. Just federal government stuff, not state stuff. And of course everything's accrual basis, so that's nice. We've known how to do that for a while now. The federal government report, which is what you'll look at for your homework, I put one out there, and so you might want to even get that out and start looking at it while we talk about it. It's going to have MD&A, so the management discussion and analysis. It's going to have your financial statements. It's going to have stewardship information, right? So the SRI, the supplementary required information, and stewardships, you know, stuff like Social Security. They've taken in this money. They've done what with it. And the auditor's report. So the auditor of the federal government is the GAO, the Government Accountability Office. So it would be a report not from Ernst & Young or Deloitte, like normal auditing. It would be the government audits itself. So the federal government financial statement, as you'll see when you go look at it for your homework, has a balance sheet, net cost, operation, changes net position, reconciliation, changes in cash balance, statement of long-term fiscal projections, social insurance, and changes in social insurance. So there's a lot more statements in that federal financial statement. But remember, they're consolidating all branches of the federal government. So the consolidated report is pretty long, and it also publishes a citizen's guide. So instead of having to be an accountant and understand this stuff and know what accruing means and all that, it just kind of puts a short guide out. Now, we're not looking at that. We're professional accountants in this class, so we're gonna go ahead and look at the actual real financial statements for homework, but just know that there's a little summary snapshot of the financial statements out there that you could show to your spouse or your mom or somebody and help her understand the how the government finances are running. Okay, so when we come back, we'll talk a little bit more about those governmental financial statements.